Hey, welcome back. Godly Finances in Small Bites. Today's episode is all about the emergency fund, how to get one, how to keep one. But before we go too deep into the material, what I would like to do is read from the scriptures from Matthew 25. This is the parable of the 10 virgins. And while I think that this has deep spiritual value for us, I believe that it also has an immediate practical value for us for many of life's important things, and particularly as they relate to being prepared for the unexpected. Let's read a little bit right from the top. At that time, the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish, and 5 were wise. The foolish ones took their lamps, but did not take any oil with them. The wise ones, however, took oil in jars along with their lamps. The bridegroom was a long time in coming, and they all became drowsy and fell asleep. At midnight, the cry rang out, "Here's the bridegroom! Come out to meet him!" Now, what we know is that what ensues after this is panic among those that didn't have any oil. And the central idea in my mind, practically, is that they had something unexpected happen to them and they weren't prepared. And it's this unexpected that is so common in anybody that has gone into debt. And in fact, it's the most common answer as to why they got there in the first place. And this is probably familiar to us, right? A family emergency, medical bills, maybe unavoidable travel or unemployment, maybe. All of these things are kind of close to us because they've happened to us. And it's the emergency fund that is designed to address that head on. Now, the emergency fund is not your whole savings. It's just something that is immediately available to you as a go-to that you can use to address a bona fide emergency, instead of having to resort to the credit card. And hopefully, many of you have already gotten on that train and have decided to cut up your credit cards. Even though it's hard to do, we know that it's super wise. Now, the emergency fund is going to do 2 things for us primarily. One of them is obvious, and the other one is a little less obvious. Now, the first thing that it'll do is it gets us away from the temptation or the need to rely on debt or a credit card or a loan as the safety net, and instead, the emergency fund itself becomes that safety net for us. Now, the second thing that it does is, very interestingly, it causes us to reevaluate what actually qualifies as an emergency. If you can imagine, you're spending your own money when you're using the emergency fund, you're probably going to be a little bit more judicious about what qualifies as an emergency versus what is just kind of a minor inconvenience where we might otherwise have just swiped a credit card. And that is valuable. And I think that it's that change of mind that this whole series is designed around, is to really be thinking critically about our money. Now, let's take a couple of examples, right? Let's say a car breaks down. Now, hopefully, a car breaking down is not going to be a surprise to any of us. And when we bought the car in the first place, also hopefully with our own money from our own savings account, our first thought wasn't going to be, now that I've got this car, it's just never going to break down, right? Like that's a little bit unreasonable. That's just kind of foolish thinking. So if we know that the car is going to break down, maybe the wise thing to do is to have a car is going to break down fund that you contribute to every single month. And again, it's that kind of thinking that we want to have to reimagine the way that we think about money so that we're not caught unaware like these foolish 5 virgins. Now, in addition, maybe we can just kind of expand on that possibility. So let's say that the car does break down and you don't have money. Let's say you don't have an emergency fund set up. Well, we know that we don't want to spend on a credit card, right? What would we do? Well, the creative but inconvenient solution, and the reality is that we would just have to rely on public transportation. We would need to ride a bike or maybe walk. And if you rewind the clock just maybe 20 years ago, what would people have done without Uber or Lyft or, a credit card or, a cell phone? Well, they would have been creative about the solution and they wouldn't have spent money. They would not have gone into debt to solve the problem. Again, it's that kind of thinking that we're looking forward to. Now, let's take a different example. Unemployment. Let's just say that we're unemployed. Even if you are unemployed now or not unemployed right now, it's probably a good idea to be thinking about how the emergency fund fits into your overall cost of living. And would you be able to maintain where you live and the emergency fund with intermittent income, right? None of us is immune to the idea of change. And so it would be very good for all of us to consider with an intermittent income, if with 80%, if we're giving 10% to the offering and we're giving 10% to our savings so that we can have a savings account, are we able to comfortably manage all of our living expenses, including where we're living, inside of that 80% and have this emergency fund over here on the side. And if we can't, then the cost of where we live is one of the biggest pieces. And it's probably the first thing that you think about if the unexpected of unemployment were to happen. Now, we've talked a little bit about how to get started, but how would we keep it? Because we know that it's just as hard keeping cash money as it is getting that cash money in place in the first place. And I think that maybe one practical here would be to bring somebody that you really trust, somebody that you know is super reliable to help you with this. Maybe you can put them in charge of the emergency fund once you've got it in place. Now, if you don't want to give somebody total control over that, maybe what you can commit to is submitting yourself to their opinion or at least their advice if something comes up. And I think that that's a really good way to avoid a big financial mistake and not spending money on something that would be unnecessary in the first place. Now, let's just say that you're on board, right? Like you want to start this emergency fund. The question is, how much, right? Now, there's no absolute answer for the very ideal, emergency fund amount. And this really is going to be a function of your day-to-day expenses and the cost of living for you and your family. But the easiest answer is it has to be at least $1,000. We're shooting for at least $1,000. I don't know about you, but when something significant goes wrong, I'm typically not counting in a couple $100. It's usually 4 figures. And so $1,000, regardless of your gender, your age, or your life circumstances, is usually going to be enough to address the immediate needs of that emergency. Now, the emergency fund is not just a one-time thing, it's an always thing. So if you use that emergency fund or any portion of it, all discretionary spending stops until you build back up that same amount that you originally had in the first place. Now, again, this may not be an ideal scenario, and in the future, we're probably going to talk about the idea of a fully funded savings account or a fully funded emergency fund, which in reality and ideally would be 2 to 3 months of all of the worst case scenario, everything that could go wrongs, all bundled into 2 to 3 months of savings so that you could kind of ride out that storm. And that would be a really great place for down the road, a great goal for down the road. In the next video, I think that we'll probably talk about how to reduce consumer debt, which is a huge enemy to financial freedom. And then we'll probably talk about a fully funded account down the road as well. But needless to say, there's a lot more material coming your way. And as always, we just want to say thank you for being here. Thanks for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next time.